Hello, listeners, and welcome to another episode of Cognitive Dissidence. As usual, I'm your host. I'm Jacob Shapiro. I'm a partner and the director of geopolitical analysis at Cognitive Investments. Joining me on the podcast today is Emre Dogru. He is managing partner at Corpera Consulting, and he has been on this podcast a few times to give us the Turkish point of view. He was good enough to set aside some time on a Monday evening for him to give us the Turkish view of the Israeli-Palestinian war that is happening right now in the Gaza Strip between Israel and Hamas. Before we get to the conversation, I just want to say, over the weekend I did my best to disengage from the news flow as much as I could, and I'm sure many of you were feeling this. The stories and the videos in particular are so terrible that it almost feels like you're experiencing the trauma yourself. I noticed this in myself, so I just want to say, vicarious trauma is a real thing. That if you are feeling angry and anxious, or if you have a shorter fuse than normal, or you're just kind of, feeling off, which I certainly have been for over a week now, it's all natural, it's all normal. Be self-aware with it, kind of experience it head on, because the mental hygiene of dealing with all the information that's coming out and all the terrible videos and things that are out there, not even to say all the misinformation that you have to sort through. It's really, really challenging, and don't take it for granted. It can affect you in ways that you might not even know. If you want to suddenly have a political fight, for example, with your friend about something you disagree with, might be because you've been thinking about or so stressed about this situation in general. At least that's my experience, and I hope that saying that helps anybody who's also feeling similar things. Otherwise, I'm not really sure what the cadence is going to look like for this week. Some of it depends on what Israel does next and whether we get a regional war. Here on Monday, around 1 p.m. Central Time, I'm a little less concerned about a regional war scenario. I was much more worried on Friday, but I don't think we're by any means out of the woods yet. And I really do think the scenario that people aren't thinking about is, what if Israel decides to be the active actor here? And I don't just mean in Gaza, but what if they are the ones that to say, okay, like, we've been on our heels right now, everybody is passive, we are going to do things so that we are on the offensive, that we are the ones actually making moves and people are reacting to us. It seems to me that everybody's in a holding pattern. All of the various nation states and factions and everything else, they're all just sort of waiting for the other shoe to drop, and I'm wondering when that's going to happen. So Jacob@cognitive.investments is my email address if you want to talk about our research and consulting services, or you want to talk about wealth management services, or if you just want to be in touch with someone to relate to about what's going on in the world. That's all I got. Take care of each other. See you out there. All right, Emre is interrupting his evening with his Turkish tea and his baklava, waiting for him at the supper table to talk to us about Turkey's view of everything that's going on. Emre, thanks for making the time, man. It's good to see you.
Thanks always, Jacob. Thanks for inviting me.
Well, we were trying to catch up, and we immediately got into pessimism about what's going on. So I just hit the record button, and Emre and I will catch up ourselves later. But it's Monday, October 16th. It's about noon here in the U.S. Central Time, evening time there in Istanbul. This will probably post in the next day or so. I'm not going to sit on things too long. But Emre, you were just telling me that you're not very optimistic about de-escalation, or for things calming down a little bit. So why don't we just start maybe with just sort of an objective geopolitical take on Turkey's view of the crisis, because Erdogan has obviously spent a lot of, I think, political and social capital in building up the cause of the Palestinians, and specifically of Hamas in the Gaza Strip. I think he was fairly quiet at the very beginning, but he has gotten increasingly louder over the last couple of days, even bringing up a Turkish drone that was shot down mysteriously in Syria a couple of days before all this started. So where do you think Turkey is sitting right now from its perspective with what's going on?
Yeah, I think first of all, we need to understand the context in which all these developments were taking place. Turkey has been trying to normalize its relations with a bunch of countries in the region, with whom Turkey did not have the best relations over the past couple of years, and that includes UAE, obviously. That includes Egypt, Israel, and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. So Turkey has been on a charm offensive, and appointment of a new foreign minister is also an indicator of that, that Turkey has been trying to normalize its ties with all these countries. And it was pretty successful overall. A new Egyptian ambassador was recently appointed. So I think one of the main goals of the Turkish government has been to normalize its ties, but of course, create more economic benefits for the country. Obviously, Turkey's economic situation is not at the best shape for the moment, so it's very, very much needs external financing. And of course, one of the ways to get this external financing is to knock the doors of Gulf countries. So Turkey's foreign policy choices and economic situation has been very much interrelated over the past few years. So when this conflict started with the Hamas assault on Israel, as you rightfully pointed out, Erdogan has been quite calm and even calling for restraint for both sides. It was a bit surprising to me as well. I mean, of course, we know that the Turkish government is very, very used to make very pragmatic choices when it comes to foreign policy. But from a political perspective, of course, it's a bit surprising for the Turkish government to start this from calling for restraint such a quiet way. Obviously, there is a political pressure on Erdogan domestically for two reasons. Because there's a conservative and Islamist part of the Turkish population which stands very firmly behind the Palestinian cause and even sometimes Hamas. So Erdogan might be feeling that pressure domestically. And of course, secondly, there is a local elections coming up in March 2024. So increasing the rhetoric, anti-Israeli rhetoric, could be very helpful for Erdogan for political purposes. But still, he was quite calm at the very beginning.
What do you think is Turkey's ideal end scenario for what's going on right now? Like if Erdogan could make what he wants to happen, what would it be?
I think Turkey is trying to play a mediating role between Hamas and Israel. And, in the first few days, Erdogan was, trying to get that role and was suggesting both the Israeli side and the Palestinian side, especially for the release of hostages. So I think Turkey is trying to position itself as a valuable partner, especially for the West, because, as you mentioned earlier, one of the things that shocked the Turkish public opinion was the shooting down of a Turkish drone by an American F-16 in Syria. So, while Turkey is trying to position itself as a valuable and powerful player in the region, of course, it would like to show to the United States, to Washington, that it can stand firmly and it can have certain regional autonomy when it comes to foreign policy choices. The reason that the drone shooting was such a shock for the Turkish public opinion is that it came shortly after the terrorist attack that fortunately failed, but it was still scary in Ankara on the day of Parliament's opening on October 1st. A few days later, Turkey started its operation in northern Syria, and as you know, an American F-16 shot down a Turkish drone. Initially, both the Turkish governments, and when we look at the statements of the Turkish Foreign Ministry, the Turkish side tried to underestimate the importance of this incident. But of course, the opposition and some parts of the public opinion, said that this is such a big deal, and that there needs to be some sort of reaction. So I also found it quite interesting that following the Israeli-Hamas conflict started, while in the first few days Erdogan was quite silent and calm, he all of a sudden, brought up this issue of Turkey being very cautious in its relations with the United States. He even questioned the value of alliance at NATO, and he even said that, what kind of alliance is this if you shoot down our drones and planes and stuff like that? So, and he even said that, there is some sort of security issues between the United States and Turkey. So, as I understand, Turkey wants to play a role in this conflict, and in return, it wants to get more role in northern Syria, right? Because this is where the PKK's branch YPG is finding shelter, and this is where Turkey is trying to secure in order to avoid further attacks on its territory. So, as I understand, by playing the Hamas-Israeli card, Turkey is asking for more role and more intervention in northern Syria.
Strategies within strategies. I want to ask about Iran, and I don't quite know how to phrase the question, because if you go back at a centuries level, Turkey and Iran have always sort of clashed over the Middle East. And you've had, Kurds and Arabs and all these other groups that are in between, and in some ways are the foot soldiers or the pawns of that conflict. It's also not lost on me that you have, Azerbaijan and Armenia and that conflict recently, and Turkey very clearly supporting Azerbaijan against a Russian-backed ally in Armenia, and Iran has allied itself with Russia, at least pragmatically for now. I think it's safe to say that. How much China is a part of that, whether China is pushing this or as I think is terrified by the potential of rising oil prices because of this conflict escalating out of control, we can leave that till later. But how does Turkey think about Iran right now? Because if Iran is the one instigating this, if it is pushing Hamas, if it's pushing Hezbollah, if it's pushing its factions within Syria and supporting the Assad regime, you would think that would bring them into conflict with Turkey. And I wonder if Turkey is thinking that way with Iran, or if it's the relationship has been remarkably friendly considering all the geopolitical obstacles between them. How does Iran play into this from Turkey's perspective?
From Turkey's perspective, as you know, Iran is the centuries-old frenemy, so to say it. There is a frozen dispute and conflict between Turkey and Iran since many, many centuries, and there is a religious part of it, an ideological part of it. There is a geopolitical part of it. So Turkey and Iran have always been and probably will always be the competitors in the region, two big countries, two big powers in the region. And I think Turkey is being drifted towards being a balancing power against Iran in the region. So whether or not Turkey will try to assume that role and will be willing to assume that role, I think that's a bit questionable, because Turkey will never want to be in a direct conflict with Iran, but rather trying to balance off Iran's influence in the region by supporting other factions maybe, or by, sometimes joining in economic sanctions. So there's a very, very cautious policy towards Iran from the Turkish perspective, and I don't think that Turkey will want to become a part of a broader conflict that involves Iran as well.
But does that mean, like, sort of in the proximate issue, let's say that we get the doomsday nightmare scenario where Hezbollah opens up a second front and Iran is offering indirect or even direct support for a conflict against Israel? Like, what does Turkey do in that situation? If the United States comes to Israel's aid against Iran, for example, does Turkey look the other way? Does that force Turkey into aligning more with the U.S.? Does it get to play that mediation role that you're talking about to extract political concessions? What happens if we spiral in that direction?
From Turkey's perspective, in the end, I would say that Turkey will always ally with its NATO allies, so the United States and other NATO allies. It's a part of the alliance, so Turkey will become a part of that alliance in the end. But as I said, it will never want to become in a direct conflict, get involved in a direct conflict with Iran, where a regional war erupts and Turkey is in direct military confrontation with Iran. That I don't think that's happening.
Do you think that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict will have any impact on what happens next with Azerbaijan and Armenia and the direction that conflict was going, or do you think that Azerbaijan and by extension Turkey are satisfied with the status quo in Nagorno-Karabakh and in the situation with Armenia?
For the moment, they seem to be happy with that, and they're looking for a regional change in Southern Caucasus. So I think it was quite a bit of a win from Azerbaijan and Turkey's side. And when there was a summit for the reconciliation efforts between Armenia and Azerbaijan, as you know, President Aliyev refused to attend the summit where Erdogan was not invited. So there is definitely an alliance between the two. And it seems like for the moment they were happy with the status quo. So I don't think that they're going to change it anytime soon. And another conflict, another tension in the region would be too much for Turkey. I don't think that it's going to get into that. But of course, the entire thing, and you mentioned this earlier regarding the oil prices and economic situation, of course, this comes at a very unfortunate time for the Turkish economy. I mentioned earlier about the foreign policy choices and how they're related with the economic situation. Of course, Turkey is a very energy-dependent country, and any small, even oil price increases that seem a bit insignificant could have huge bill and cost on the Turkish economy, because it's very much dependent on energy imports. As you know, one of the Achilles heel of the Turkish economy is the current account deficit, and in the first 8 months of 2023, the current account deficit is around like 43 billion US dollar, which is creates a huge financing need for the Turkish economy. So some part of it is, financed by, portfolio investments, short-term capital. Some part of it is financed by central bank reserves and that sort of other net omissions and errors. But if Turkey finds itself in a difficult position to compensate for energy prices, and also if the Gulf countries, such as the UAE and the Saudi Arabia, which previously committed to investing something like 50 billion US dollar in Turkey in the coming years, reconsider their options as a result of this regional conflict, that will be quite a bit of nightmare scenario for Turkey. Because this comes at a time when the Turkish government, with the newly appointed Finance and Treasury Minister Mehmet Şimşek, trying to reassure the investors in New York, in London, in the Gulf, in other parts of the world, that Turkey is now, favoring the rational policies and the orthodox economic policies. So it was right before the time that, especially institutional investors are looking into whether or not those promises will be kept. But of course, this regional tensions can change all the plans for all sides.
Yeah. You mentioned energy, so that's the other thing I wanted to take your temperature on, which is you noted how Turkey has become very dependent on the Gulf countries, and in Saudi Arabia particularly. It almost seems like, the only reason that Erdogan has been able to do his little tightrope of monetary policy is because the Gulf was there to bail him out. And maybe he knew the Gulf was there to bail him out the entire time. What is your read on what Saudi Arabia wants? Do you think that Saudi Arabia really wants normalization with Israel? Is it part of a broader reset of the U.S.-Saudi relationship? I've seen reports that say that what Saudi Arabia really wants is a defense pact with the U.S., and the U.S. is making normalization with Israel part of that. How much does Saudi Arabia's calculus here affect what Turkey is doing? Because as you said, if we were talking a year ago, maybe this is less operative. But right now, you can't really insult the Gulf. You need the Gulf right now. So in some ways, whatever the Gulf thinks about this crisis maybe is what's going to drive some of Erdogan's rhetoric. Maybe not. But I don't know. Talk to me about your view of the situation in Saudi Arabia and how that affects Turkey.
Well, the situation with Saudi Arabia is, I think, they're trying to, especially Mohammed bin Salman, of course, has a new vision about the country, and would like to reform the economy, and is trying to, normalize its ties with some countries in the region, and that includes Turkey as well. So from Turkey's perspective, especially after the coup d'etat in Egypt, after Sisi's coming into power, especially defense relations and economic relations with Saudi Arabia, the Saudi family, has deteriorated to a great extent. So, and that also included, of course, the killing of Jamal Khashoggi in the Saudi consulate in Istanbul. And right after that, it seemed like, Turkey was going to really increase the tension with Saudi Arabia to a point where, reconciliation almost looked like, quite impossible. But especially after the economic turmoil in Turkey, and also Saudi Arabia's new policies in terms of normalizing some relations with Israel and other countries in the region, it seemed to Turkey that it was the right time to get in touch with Mohammed bin Salman, and also to normalize the ties with the Saudi regime. And a part of that was clearly also normalizing its ties with the Egyptian government. So it seems like it's all interrelated, and Turkey is, doing what it has to do.
As always. All right. Well, let's put on our geopolitical analyst hats for a minute, because I know you consult with companies in Turkey. I've already been on 2 calls this morning with clients of ours, and the question I'm, of course, getting is this going to end anytime soon? Is there a chance of a regional war? What are the next steps here? You and I have not compared notes yet, so I'm the client and I'm asking you. So Emre, is this going to spiral into regional war? What are you telling your Turkish clients about whether this remains an Israeli-Palestinian affair or becomes something much more serious?
Well, I mean, I keep getting the same question as well. I'm saying that it seems like this conflict will be contained, so it's not going to spiral out into a regional war, because the balance of power in the region, and also the different interests of the countries, including Egypt and Saudi Arabia and Qatar, forces all these countries, and including Turkey, of course, forces all these leaders to make rational choices. So at some point, of course, Israel will have to make a counter move, and they will have to show the world and also its population that it's taking necessary actions to make sure that such an attack doesn't happen again. But still, I don't think that this is going to turn into a regional war, because that will be very devastating for the entire region.
I'm going to throw a scenario at you. You tell me if you think it's realistic, and if it is realistic, what you think would happen. Let's say that, if we were going into Friday, I think everybody was saying, the Israeli invasion is imminent. And oil prices were up, 4 or 5% on Friday, because after round tripping, it seemed like the fear over the regional war was coming up again. Let's say Israeli strategic decision makers are sitting there thinking, this is what Hamas wants. They want us to invade the Gaza Strip because they know that they can impose a lot of casualties, and then maybe Hezbollah or somebody else can take advantage. I would imagine then that the Israeli counter to that would be, okay, no more factions on any of our borders. Let's go after both of them at the same time and surprise them. And you've seen Israel evacuate some of the towns in the north. They've been bombing Syrian airports and things like that. So I'm not saying this is likely at all. I'm just saying it's one implausible but not impossible scenario. But let's say that Israel's counterattack is an invasion of the Gaza Strip to wipe out Hamas and southern Lebanon to wipe out Hezbollah, and they decide to go after these Iranian militias in Syria too. A, do you think that's realistic? And B, it would be nice for Turkey if Hezbollah and Iranian-backed Syrian militias took it in the teeth there. So is that something where Erdogan stops for a second? Or does he see the threat of regional conflagration and is like, no more? Or do you think it's just so outlandishly unrealistic that we shouldn't even worry about it?
Then my question would be, does Israel have that kind of military capability to launch a various of attacks in these regions? It would be... it could create some security concerns back at home as well, right? So if the Israeli government decides to allocate so much military resources to different fronts, then that could create some sort of weakness on Israel territory. Would that be a fair statement?
I think it is definitely a fair statement, but Israel has never been as politically unified in the last 30 years as it is today, and they've mobilized the army, and they can't mobilize the army for forever. So if you have the three, you're never going to be politically stronger, you're never going to have more goodwill internationally. There are a lot of places where Israel doesn't have any goodwill at all, but the extent of Hamas's attacks, this is about as good as an international position as Israel can find itself in. And I don't know, to your point, in 2006, Israel failed miserably against Hezbollah, but it failed because it wasn't willing to take the infantry casualties to do it. It thought that the Air Force was going to solve anything. So if 1,000 dead Israelis and 200 hostages have gotten rid of Israeli squeamishness, I don't know, maybe. I take your point. It's going to be hard enough to do Gaza, but I am... When you start thinking about it, it doesn't make sense for Israel to go into Gaza because Hamas and those other militias are just sitting right there. So either you're building up force as a threat to get what you want and to get the hostages released, or maybe you're considering something else. But then I'm sure they're also considering that, and it's like moves within counter moves. So I don't know. I was just wondering if you're thinking that direction, or if you're telling me to calm down, Jacob. That's not possible. So don't worry about it.
Well, definitely a broader attack on various parts, as you said, in Lebanon and Syria, and also on Gaza could be an interesting strategy for Israel. But as I said, in terms of military resources and allocation, and get your point about the unity at home and mobilization of the army. But it's such a diverse region, and there are a lot of unforeseen, forces in those territories. So. From Turkey's perspective, it could be an interesting opportunity because obviously Turkey's main concern is securing the areas in northern Syria and making sure that the PKK militants do not find shelter there. So I think Turkey is seeing a window of opportunity to do more military intervention in that area and to make sure that doesn't have that kind of attack from Syrian soil on its territory again. But yeah, I mean, I don't know if that can happen as a result of an Israeli counterattack.
Is Turkey's interest just to take northern Syria so that the Syrian Kurds can't establish their own little autonomous zone, or does it still extend to the Assad regime and wanting to get someone in Damascus who leans more towards Ankara or to Riyadh, to Sunni Arab support rather than to Iran? Or has Turkey just given up that Assad is there and he's not going to be taken out right this moment, and it's really just about securing northern Syria?
I mean, that would be the ideal scenario, but I don't think that we are not there yet anymore. I mean, it seems like Turkey has more realistic expectations from Syria now. I mean, that was the main expectation many years ago, having a more Muslim Brotherhood-like regime that is more friendly with Turkey and increasing Turkey's influence in Syria. But that's clearly not happening. So Turkey's immediate interest is to make sure that at least some of the refugees could go back home, because it's also becoming a very controversial subject in Turkey. The country is hosting more than 5 million Syrian refugees, and the anti-refugee sentiment is increasing. And of course, there is a political support behind it. There are some minority parties small parties that's trying to capitalize on that anti-refugee sentiment. And secondly, of course, making sure that the Kurdish militants, the PKK militants, do not find shelter in Syria, especially in northern Syria. So that is the immediate interest of Turkey. Whether or not Damascus regime could change, I don't think that's a scenario that is being discussed in Ankara anymore.
Fair enough. Last sort of question on Turkey's point of view. China has been, I would say, relatively passive here so far. I mean, they're talking about sending an envoy, but I've been saying that, the comparisons to 1973 really aren't that operative, because the United States is no longer dependent on Gulf oil. The country that is dependent on Gulf oil is China. And if we're starting to talk about the Strait of Hormuz and Saudi oil production and things like that, yes, it would be bad for Turkey, also very, very bad for China. And I know that Erdogan has batted his eyelashes at China from time to time. Do you think that Turkey thinks that there is a productive role for China here to play in general, or is China just really not involved and it's just sort of like on the sidelines and the real decisions are happening in Cairo, in Riyadh, in Tehran, and in Ankara?
I mean, frankly speaking, I haven't seen any indicator of Turkey talking to China about especially this, regional conflict. So I don't think that from Ankara's perspective, China is playing an influential role in this conflict. Though in general, China is an important partner of Turkey, and Turkey has been very, very hesitant to condemn, things like, the oppression of Uyghur Turks in China. So it was, very cautious. Ankara was very cautious about it, not to mention that in bilateral meetings. Turkey has this working relationship with China, but, for the moment, as far as this regional conflict is concerned, I haven't seen any indicator of them being talking to each other.
Yeah. Last question. So you say that you feel like it's relatively contained. How could you be wrong? What is the scenario that you think would invalidate your thesis about it being relatively contained?
Great question. I think the fact that Israel taking its time and instead of being reactive, if it could make plans for a broader attack and, being much more calculated about how to release hostages, how to identify the militants, and what kind of regional, we have seen from government officials from the Israeli government that they're going to change the reality in the region, what kind of regional reality they're envisioning. If we can see that kind of planning phase instead of attacking directly on certain territories, then I think that could be, I know that what I'm saying is counterintuitive, because, normally you would expect, an immediate reaction with, the biggest military force. But in this case, I think if Israel takes its time and makes more elaborate decisions, that could really change my calculation.
And would that be like Israel doing that? Would that bring Iran in, and then Turkey would have to deal with that? Is Iran sort of the big wild card?
Yeah. that kind of things.
All right.
Yeah, I mean, like drawing other players into this conflict, not totally isolating, only Hamas, not dealing directly and only with Hamas, but also dealing with other actors in the region, and maybe involving other actors in this conflict.
Yeah, it is striking how many of the different actors in the conflict are being reactive right now. I mean, Hamas is really, maybe Iran was the one pulling the strings, although it doesn't seem to me like Iran was the one that was like, do this at this exact time. But there is an overwhelming behavior of passivity, I think, from all the actors. You don't really see anyone trying to make their mark quite yet, or at least not visibly. Yeah. All right, well, Emre, we've taken up enough of your evening. Thank you so much for taking the time, and I hope we get to talk to you soon again on happier topics, like the rejuvenation of the Turkish economy under orthodox monetary policy.
Yeah, hopefully. Thanks, man.
Thank you so much for listening to the Cognitive Dissidence podcast, brought to you by Cognitive Investments. If you are interested in learning more about cognitive investments, you can check us out online at cognitive.investments. That's cognitive.investments. You can also write to me directly if you want at jacob@cognitive.investments. Cheers, and we'll see you out there. The views expressed in this commentary are subject to change based on market and other conditions. This podcast may contain certain statements that may be deemed forward-looking statements. Please note that any such statements are not guarantees of any future performance, and actual results or developments may differ materially from those projected. Any projections, market outlooks, or estimates are based upon certain assumptions and should not be construed as indicative of actual events that will occur. Cognitive Investments LLC is a registered investment advisor. Advisory services are only offered to clients or prospective clients where Cognitive and its representatives are properly licensed or exempt from licensure. For additional information, please visit our website at www.cognitive.investments. The information provided is for educational and informational purposes only and does not constitute investment advice, and it should not be relied on as such. It should not be considered a solicitation to buy or an offer to sell a security. It does not take into account any investor's particular investment objectives, strategies, tax status, or investment horizon. You should consult your attorney or tax advisor.